Hey everyone, thanks. Welcome back to The Red Lettuce. Today I am joined with Carl Jha and Sun. Both of them are writers and podcasters, and they both write a lot about China. They are both Han Chinese people, and they critique the United States imperialist media a lot. Sun did this really great article a while ago about a BBC expose where he broke it down. And recently, the what it was it? The New York Times did another expose, like with some horror stories about a woman who had been through the the education camps. So just to get right into some of these topics, I just want to start off with a couple basic questions, like how can we decode propaganda in the era of the hashtag StopAsianHate when so much of it is really geared toward manufacturing consent for war with China and makes Han Chinese people seem like invaders in their own home country?
I think it's actually quite difficult because, for people who might not be well versed in the subject, they usually just get inundated with all these propaganda from mainstream media narratives. What do you think, Sung?
I think, yeah, there's just it's a full court press. They're just throwing really everything at the wall, and the narrative, which we'll talk about later, has kind of shifted from 2017 to today, like the nature of the claims and everything. And for people who might not be paying attention the whole time, right? Like you don't necessarily pick up on that.
Yeah, because in US, people are busy, right? I mean, people don't even have time to read the articles; they just read the headlines. And you don't, unless you are, you somewhat a researcher, like a scholar, or somebody just being really interested in the issue of China and in Xinjiang in particular. You probably won't be able to detect all the BS, to separate the propaganda from the facts. Because a lot of the propaganda, they do contain a grain of truth, right? So it's not 100% lie, but they might slip in some grain of truth in there to make it sound plausible. But again, unless you are an avid media watcher, you might not be able to know how to read you might not just not know how to read it.
I've noticed in a lot of these articles that one of the first things they bring up is the East Turkestan movement, which the more I read about it, the more suspicious I am. That's usually what triggers me every time. I don't mean to use the word trigger in a. That's usually what sets off my spidey senses, I guess. Is when they refer to the region as East Turkestan, because even on Wikipedia it says that the East Turkestan Islamic Movement is aligned with Al Qaeda, and it's a separatist movement. And so I'm wondering if maybe we could get a little bit of
Yeah,
history there.
yeah, I can address that. I mean, in the media, normally it's presented as that is a traditional name for the region, East Turkestan. It's not. It has always been a very politically charged term. The traditional name of the local people for the region have been Altishar. Altishar means six cities. It referred to the six oasis cities that spread around the Taklamakan edge of Taklamakan Desert, or in the what's also known as the Tarim Basin in southern Xinjiang. So Xinjiang, for people who don't know, is this huge northwestern region in China that's the size of Alaska. But the region is very geographically diverse, and there's a huge Tianshan mountain range which cuts it in half. The southern half Xinjiang, the areas that's south of Tianshan Mountains, it's composed largely of the Taklamakan Desert, which is the world's second largest moving sand desert, and dotted along the edge of the desert are these oasis towns that's been fed by the glacial runoff on the Tianshan Mountains, and that's where that's where the majority of the people live. They live in farming communities in these oasis cities, and the people in Xinjiang today, they weren't even the term Uyghur is a recent invention. First of all, the people in Xinjiang, the majority of people are Turkic they're Turkic speaking, majority Muslim. So that does set aside them from other parts of China, and their culture is Central Asian because the region of Xinjiang is geographically part of Central Asia, and culturally as well. And the local population used to be used to be Iranian speaking, and by Iranian I don't mean like people from the current nation state of Iran. I mean like
the
Iranian.
Yeah,
I mean the Iranian language family. It's like they call. So, for example, in Afghanistan, Pashtun is considered a part of Eastern Iranian language, that branch. So it's similar for people in Xinjiang. Back 1,000 years ago, they speak Eastern Iranian language, and but then there was there's a nomadic, a steppe nomadic empire in Mongolia that's made up by the Uyghurs, the ancient Uyghur people, and the Uyghur Khaganate was destroyed by the attacks of Kyrgyz around I think 840 AD. And after the collapse of Uyghur Khanate, a lot of the Uyghur people, they migrated from Mongolia into the present day Xinjiang, and where they took over and became kind of the ruling. There became like a ruling class. So because of their rule, that their language, their Turkic language, started filtered down and eventually took over. Like they blended with the local people, but they also, their language, their custom also left the imprint. So like today's the people that we call Uyghurs are descendants of the ancient Uyghur from Mongolia, but also from these ancient Iranian populations in the Tarim Basin. And for a long time there, for and then around 1000 AD, Islam came to the region because one of the polities that's based in Kashgar, the Kara Khanate, the ruler of Kara Khanate decided to adopt Islam, and then he imposed that religion throughout his realm, and the Kara Khanate also took over other parts of what's today's Xinjiang. They took over area like Khotan, because Xinjiang before 1000 AD was primarily a Buddhist region, but with some pockets of Nestorian Christianity. And then about by 1000, there's a gradual process of Islamization, which only completed I think around like 15th, 16th century. But when it first started, when the people in Kashgar started to adopt Islam, the term Uyghur was actually very specific usage. It's referred to the Buddhist Uyghurs of Eastern Xinjiang in what's today's Turpan and Hami region in Eastern Xinjiang. That's where there was a Buddhist Uyghur kingdom. So a famous scholar, Mahmud Kashgari, who is from Kashgar, and he went to Baghdad and he compiled this famous Turkic campaign, like a compendium of Turkic languages. In this book, it's like an encyclopedia. He called what he calls Uyghurs are actually the Buddhist Uyghurs of Eastern Xinjiang. And then after the Mongol conquest of the whole region, the name Uyghur started to fade from history because as Turpan Basin and the Hami region also been conquered by the Mongol Khanate and start to adopt Islam, the Uyghur name kind of passed into history. And for a long time, the people in the region, their identity is local. They refer to themselves as Kashgar Lik, which means somebody from Kashgar, or Khotan Lik, or somebody from Khotan, or Turpan Lik, or somebody from Turpan. And they refer to themselves as Muslim. So, and sometimes they also refer themselves as Turkey. So Turkey or Muslim, that's their identity. And then they refer to the region as Altishar, a group of 6 oasis cities. I'm taking a long way around this to work out through all the terminology, but I hope people patient with me so I can.
Right. No, I really, really appreciate you breaking it down like this, because I think a lot of people they don't know the history, and I think that a lot of these media articles rely on people not being informed about the history of the region, and they frame the Uyghur people as some type of indigenous group subject to invasion or colonialism from Han Chinese people. And what you were saying earlier about the Iranian-speaking group, the Tokharians, they were there, a long time ago. And they found, I read that they found this mummy that was, a Europeoid or whatever they want to call it, which is
Western Eurasian. Let's just say Western Eurasian. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Western Eurasian. Yeah. And that kind of like upset a lot of what, a lot of the romantic history that people in Xinjiang knew about themselves. And
yeah, there's different strands of kind of nationalism and national creation myth.
Right.
There's a claim of how like kind of unbroken 10,000 years like unbroken history of Uyghur in Xinjiang. But I think the point is Xinjiang has been a crossroad on the Silk Road, which linked China to the greater Western region. And the area is always contested by various empires, and there's various clashing identities. And the Chinese Empire first moved into this region around 200 BC. This is so during the Han Dynasty. My wife is calling me.
It's okay. Take the call from your wife, and maybe Sun can give us some of his insight.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Take your time, Carl. All right, Sun. Thank you for hanging out here for a second. Can you give us a bit of what you know about this topic, and maybe dive into the East Turkestan Islamic Movement and pick up where Carl left off? I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, so history-wise, I definitely have to defer to Carl. Like I kind of know the outlines and the basics of what he's talking about, but definitely not in that detail. I'd say more of my focus has been kind of reading like the news articles that they're putting out, how they frame even more recent events like in 2009 or 2014 or so. And, that's kind of been the focus of things that I've written about and stuff. And, like the New Yorker article that you mentioned recently, like it does give a little bit of an overview of kind of the history of the region stuff. But as you mentioned, it leaves out quite a lot, right? Like, I think its contention was that.
I'm back. Hi, guys.
Hey, Carl.
I'm back.
Welcome back.
Can I pick up where I left off?
Well, Sun's
Yeah,
going into the he's going to start with this New York article.
Oh, I was just mentioning that in the New Yorker article, like they also give an overview of the history, as nowhere as in detail as yours. But the very salient point is that you mentioned that there's Han contact interchange, like fighting in that region as early as 200 BC, but the New Yorker places it at 1700s, the Qing conquest of Xinjiang, as kind of the arrival of Han Chinese people in the region, which is.
I think the New York article is a very well-crafted propaganda, and I think I would very much like to discuss the New York article later, because I think, it's like you asked earlier that, how do we detect propaganda from truth, right? I think the New Yorker article is an excellent piece of propaganda, creating narrative that's a case study. But I just like to quickly go over the broad history of Xinjiang. So during the Han Dynasty, about 2,000 years ago, in its war against the steppe nomad empire of Xiongnu, the Han sent an expedition to the present day area of Xinjiang and establish a sort of protectorate over the region. And he also has established series of military farms to garrison the region against the attacks of the nomadic Xiongnu from the Mongolian steppe. But then the control of Xinjiang from China-based empire kind of waxed and waned based on the strength of these empires, because by Tang Dynasty, I think Tang Dynasty, that's when by Tang Dynasty, that's when a lot of things were happening in Xinjiang that ultimately shaped its identity today. So after the An-Lushan rebellion in 756, the Han garrison withdrew from Xinjiang, and that actually allowed the Tibetan Empire based in Tibet to take over the region, and that remained the case until kind of the simultaneous collapse of the Tibetan Empire and the Uyghur Khaganate around 840 AD. And so that's when the Uyghurs migrated out of Mongolia. They defeated the Tibetans and took over the region, and then subjugated the local population. So I was speaking about Iranian speaking. That's actually not quite accurate, because Xinjiang is very complicated. The southern half of the Tarim Basin was Iranian speaking, so the region of Kashgar, Khotan. But in the northern half of the Tarim Basin, in places like Aksu, Turpan, etc., they speak, as you mentioned, they speak Tokharian. Tokharian is a different branch of the Indo-European language family. It's not the Iranian branch. So there's an Indo-Iranian branch, and there's the other branch. the Tokharian is belong to an older branch, and they there has been that divide of Tokharian in the north and the Khotan Saka Iranian speakers in the south. But that divide was erased when the Uyghurs came in from Mongolia and took over the whole region. And then the area after that was fought over by the Mongols, during the Mongol Civil War. The Yuan dynasty, the China-based Yuan dynasty, fought against the Chagatai Khanate based in Central Asia, and the battleground was through Xinjiang, and that's when the Buddhist Uyghur kingdom was destroyed. And eventually, because Chagatai Khanate converted to Islam, and they took over the whole region, and that's why Xinjiang became majority Muslim, and and I'm trying to get to where the East Turkestan thing come into being.
I know I'm following you. It makes a lot of sense. I appreciate this state sanctioned Chinese propaganda about.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for putting up with this.
No, it's really interesting. I'm really enjoying it. Please keep.
So for this region then was ruled by various Mongol Khanate and their successor state until 1760, as like mentioned in that New Yorker article. So 1760, by 1600, the Manchus, which is an ethnic group from today's northeast China, or AKA Manchuria, they came out of their forest and crossing the Great Wall and conquered the whole entire region of China, right? So all the land that controlled by the Ming Dynasty, as well as they subjugated the Mongol Khanate from Inner Mongolia to Outer Mongolia, and then they fought with the Zhuanggar Mongol Khanate that was based in present-day Xinjiang for primacy, and eventually the Qing conquered the Zhuanggar Khanate by 1760, and that's when they incorporated the area into the Qing Empire, in the Qing Dynasty, and that's what the name Xinjiang come from, because at the time, the Qianlong Emperor considered this newly acquired territory. So there was actually a whole series of new of regions known as Xinjiang at the time. There was also a called Xinan Xinjiang, or Southwestern New Territory, that refers to the area around Guizhou and Yunnan. But what today Xinjiang was known as Xiyue Xinjiang, because Xiyue is an ancient Chinese term for the region, which literally just means Western region, and Xiyue Xinjiang means like the Western region, New Territory. But after a few decades, that Xiyue part got dropped off, and it just became Xinjiang, because then that's how that region was known to the Chinese speakers. But for the locals, it just it has always been Altishar, but around 18. So the name Turkestan is a Persian name, right? Stan is a postfix in Persian, refer to land, and so Turkestan means like land of the Turks, and the Persians apply that term to like this broader region, generally to the east of them. There's not a specific. It's kind of a nebulous term, but they refer to like most of the Central Asia as Turkestan. And after the Qing conquest of the region, this area was known as Chinese Turkestan in the other foreign language media. Turkestan originally is a Persian name given to the region, so it's an outside name for the region, and it was a kind of broad term for encompassing the entire Central Asia. And then by 19th century, when Russia start pushing into Central Asia, and also the British start to expand from British India, pushing north into Afghanistan. So they started, all these imperialist powers start to to show interest in the region, and they wanted to name the region in a name that will denote its emphasize on its Turkic Turkic Muslim nature, apart from being its Chinese political control. So the Russians started to revive the use of Turkestan for Central Asia. And at the time, the name then was adopted to use Chinese Turkestan to call the area of southern Xinjiang. So, as I mentioned before, Xinjiang is divided in half by the Tianshan Mountains. There's a northern part and southern part. North of Tianshan Mountain is mostly steppe land that's traditionally populated by the nomads. At the time of Qing conquest in 1760, North Xinjiang was also known as Zhuanggaria because that was the land of the Zhuanggar Mongols. But the Qing conquest the Qing conquest of the Zhuanggar Khanate was very brutal because the Manchu Emperor Qianlong, he actually ordered to carry out the Manchu Mongol armies to carry out a genocide of the Zhuanggar Mongols. So as a result, the northern Xinjiang was greatly depopulated, and it's around this time, the Qing officials, they started to import migrant farmers from southern Xinjiang, but also from other parts of China to populate the depopulated Zhuanggaria in northern Xinjiang. During the Qing Dynasty times, there was still a distinction between north and south. So in the north, they call it Zunbu, or English equivalent would be Zhuanggaria. And in the southern part is called Huijiang, which literally in Chinese means Muslim region. And for the British and the Russians who are coming to contact this region, they decide to give a name Chinese Turkestan for the southern Xinjiang, for the area of the Tarim Basin, to emphasize on its Turkic nature. But then the Russian Empire then started to expand to the rest of Central Asia by late 19th century. So by 1860s, Tsarist Russia started to take over what is today's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, etc. Then they decided that the Russian Turkologist or sinologist Nikita Bucharin then proposed the term East Turkestan to replace Chinese Turkestan, because to de-emphasize the Chinese part. So the Russian part. This was 1829, just before the Russian invasion of the West Turkestan, right? Or what would later become the Russian Turkestan. So they proposed to revive the name Turkestan for the whole area of Central Asia, and then they also proposed to use the name East Turkestan to replace Chinese Turkestan to de-emphasize the Chinese sovereignty in the region. And then by late 19th century, Russia has expanded to the Xinjiang border. Then their part of Central Asia then became known as a Russian Turkestan or West Turkestan. And so this is how the name East Turkestan come about. I went through like a long explanation, but so Turkestan has since 19th century became a political term, a politically charged term to describe the region, and by early 20th century, because after the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet expanded into Central Asia, there was an attempt to classify people into different nationalities or ethnicities, and so they can start different ethnic-based republics. So before, the whole region of Russian Turkestan under Tsarist Empire was carved up into different different autonomous republics. So there will be Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, etc. And that kind of went started the process of identifying people and giving them names. So that's when we have Kazakhs, Uzbeks, and Kyrgyz, and a group of nationalists, Muslim nationalists from Xinjiang region, who were in Tsarist Russia at the time. Well, what was before Tsarist Russia, but now Soviet Russia. They attended the meeting in Tashkent. This was in 1920s. And then they decided to adopt a new name for all the Turkic Muslim sedentary dwellers in Xinjiang. They decided to adopt the name Uyghur, which would link to the ancient Uyghur people, to this ancient history. Even though that name has been discontinuing use, it has kind of faded away in usage for several hundred years at that point. And then because in 1930s, the Chinese warlord in Xinjiang, Sensai, he depended on the Soviet support for his continued rule. So he adopted the Soviet terminology. So that's when the Uyghur term became imported and adopted across Xinjiang. And because People's Republic of China, largely adopted the Soviet model in terms of its nationality policies, that was reinforced. So now there is now kind of, we can talk about this construction, that identity construction, but now it's a fact, right? Now there is a people called the Uyghur people. I just sorry for taking so long, but this is kind of the background of the Xinjiang kind of history in a nutshell. Right. But then there's also but Xinjiang is also a very diverse place, not just geographically but ethnically as well. So the Uyghur term applies to the sedentary dwellers, the sedentary Turkic Muslim dwellers, but that didn't cover the nomadic Turkic groups like the Kazakh and Kyrgyz, who live in other parts of Xinjiang. So the Kazakh moved into northern Xinjiang after the Zhuanggar Mongols have been greatly depopulated. The Kazakhs start moving in from the direction of Kazakhstan. So there's also a significant Kazakh population in northern Xinjiang, and there's also Kyrgyz people in southern Xinjiang along the Pamir Mountains, and there's a small group of Eastern Iranian speaking Chinese Tajiks in the Tashkurgan region on the border with Pakistan, and then there's still Mongols and Manchus and different Manchu groups that came in as the imperial troops, that were descendant of the imperial troops during the Qing dynasty. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Qing administrator also brought in Han migrant farmers from other part of China like Gansu, Henan, to populate the northern Xinjiang. So northern Xinjiang is even more mixed because it has all these different groups coming in. So by end of 19th century, the population demographics in Xinjiang was about 1/3. At the time, the Qing administrator, they didn't make a separation between the Han Chinese and the Chinese-speaking Muslim, or now known as Hui, because they at the time the Qing imperial bureaucrats just called them Han Muslims. So these two groups are lumped together, and they counted for 1/3 of the population in Xinjiang overall. And they mostly live in the northern part, in the northern Xinjiang, north of the Tianshan Mountains. But south of Tianshan Mountains, in the Tarim Basin, that's like the homeland of what today we call the Uyghur people. So that's, I think hopefully that provided the historical context for the Xinjiang from like
Absolutely.
way back to the more recent times.
Yeah, and thank you so much for going into all that detail. That checks out with a lot of the stuff that I've been reading. But it's also my understanding, and maybe Sun can speak to this as well. When reading media about how China is supposedly persecuting Muslims, the Hui people are never brought up. Like, they're suspiciously never being genocided, but they're quote unquote at risk for being genocided, which I think is really interesting because they don't really provide a lot of evidence or context for that. But I remember a while ago.
I just like to interject for a second and remind people that one of the ASPI analysts. So ASPI is this Australian think tank that produced 90% of the xenophobic anti-China narratives in the Australian media. One of the ASPI analysts, Nathan Ruther, accused of a Chinese Muslim Australian who goes by the name Steel Muslim on Twitter of being a Han supremacist. And when Steel Muslim, his Twitter handle is Steel Muslim, but his nickname is Timur, and so Timur said, "Dude, I'm not even Han, I'm Hui." And to that, Nathan Rooster responded, "Oh, but Hui is just basically Han Muslim. You're basically Han." And
That's so racist.
I thought it was just so enlightening, this white boy from Australia deciding on who's, what the different Chinese ethnicity should be to fit his own political agenda.
Yeah, they really enjoy doing that. They're really trying to make Han people seem like invaders in their own country. From what I've also read is that Han people have lived in Xinjiang for over 2,000 years, and when a lot of the policies for like moving people, like especially Han people, were that Han people were inhabiting places that had not been inhabited by Uyghur people, and that was like an intentional thing, that they didn't want to displace the population of people already there. And Urumqi is part of that. It's mostly, it was mostly populated by Han Chinese people, but it's still got a Uyghur or a Turkic language name for the city.
A Mongol name, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a Mongol name, means beautiful pasture. It's like a old Zhuanggar Mongol name. And the thing is, the kind of whole China scholarship, China watcher crowd is, they're very kind of free with the facts, because they will say things like, "Oh, the China, China is not really a legitimate kind of the successor state to the Qing dynasty, because the Qing rulers are Manchus, right? They're not Han." But on the other hand, they will say when they talk about the Qing dynasty conquest of Xinjiang, they will suddenly Manchus are now Chinese, and then it was the Chinese that committed genocide on the Zhuanggar Mongols. So it's like whatever fits our agenda, right? And I'm glad that at least acknowledge Manchus are Chinese people, but it's kind of whatever. Yeah,
that's something that Sun and I were actually talking about yesterday. So here's my question, and maybe we can get Sun to give some perspective here. Is Han culture Chinese culture? And what is Chinese culture?
I think Chinese culture is definitely not just Han culture, and even Han culture is like incredibly diverse, right? Like, my parents are from Northeast China, and I have to say the culture there is very different from, say, like where my wife's from, which is in the southwest near where Carl's from, Sichuan, like that, there's a huge culture difference there. There's a huge culture shock if you move from
Oh,
one of those
sorry,
places to
son.
another.
Did you understand your wife's native tongue when you first met her?
So if they speak Chuan, like Sichuan Mandarin, and they
No, no, no,
speak
no, 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 no. I'm
slowly
not
enough,
talking
I
about.
can.
No, no, I'm not talking about Sichuan Standard Mandarin. I'm talking about if they just speak like just straight up Sichuanese.
I can't unless they speak really, really slowly. Then maybe if they hold my hand through the whole process, I could. But if they're speaking at
Yeah.
normal speed, I cannot.
Yeah, so that's my mother tongue, by the way. That like it was always funny to me when I was growing up because we would study Standard Mandarin in school, but so we have no trouble understanding people who come into Sichuan or Chongqing who speak Standard Mandarin or somebody who speak a dialect that's closer to Standard Mandarin. So like I would have not have too much problem understand Sun and his people from his hometown, but they will have a lot of trouble understand us because
Yeah. And
yeah.
dialect's one part of it, but just traditions and like things people do and food and all of that, it's all very different, right? So
Well, I mean, I think there was a time in history, like kind of Han was kind of synonymous with like a kind of stand for Chinese, but that's I think that kind of changed. Around the time I would say around the time of the Qin dynasty, because Qin dynasty rulers they themselves are not Han, they're Manchus. Um, and they're also very conscious of the fact, and they actually propose the idea that China should be a multi-ethnic state, with all different nationality, not just Han. So you'll be a state for both Han, Manchu, Mongols, Tibetans, basically everyone in the realm that the Manchu Emperor created. So
Right.
that idea of China being a multi-ethnic state with many ethnicity start to become accepted by late 19th century when through mass media and also mass education, then people starting to buy into that concept. Yes, all of the Qin dynasty lands are China, including Xinjiang. I mean, that kind of set in stone by, I say by like late 1800s, like so by like 1890, certainly by 1880s and 1890s.
when you think about that, that is probably earlier than when Americans started to accept that America should be, a multi-ethnic, multiracial country, right? Because certainly that wasn't the case in 1776.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we had like the period of manifest destiny where expansion out west was, the white man's destiny. And I think it's really interesting that China, within the past during this period, is accepting plural nationalism, whereas like states like France, or and other Western states are, promoting and almost demanding a like certain type of like in France they want to stamp out like any other dialects, and if it's not Parisian it's not like the standard. So I'm hoping we can kind of talk about language policy too,
Yes.
because it's even with the differences between the North and the South, and it sounds like there's some dialectal differences that make communicating a bit of a challenge. Like there's language barriers with
Let's just say
dialect.
that people in China today will not be able to understand Mao without subtitles. Because
Interesting. Wow. Yeah.
because I have listened to Mao's speech,
Yeah.
declaring the founding of the People's Republic many times.
Yeah.
I would need a Chinese subtitle to understand exactly what he's saying. And Mao wasn't even just speaking in his local dialect; he was just speaking in his way, trying to speak standard Mandarin, but
Right.
he has a very,
Yeah.
very thick accent.
I think
Yeah.
it's interesting how Americans can understand how it's important for people who don't speak English to learn English so that they can read American laws and function, yeah, like have basic functions navigating society here. Um, but they can't apply that same thinking to China, which is one of the really really big talking points that a lot of people use. They're like the media is pushing this line that the Chinese government, the evil Chinese government, is forcing people to learn Mandarin to replace their language. And Sun had, when he wrote that article breaking down this BBC documentary, um, and
I also wanted to give a little bit kind of historical comparison, right, between in China and the
mhm,
development in the West, because
right,
during the Qin dynasty, it's at that time because the Qin emperor ruled the whole all of his realm as an empire, so
right.
it's basically kind of laissez faire at the grassroots level. So
Yeah, yeah,
Xinjiang.
we can definitely get into that. I do
Yeah.
want to talk about some of Sun's work though.
Okay, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
no, you're quite all right. I appreciate your knowledge. But Sun had broken down um how people were learning Mandarin, and there were and in these camps or these educational facilities or whatever people are calling them, these re-education centers. And one of the things he noticed that like the one of the students had made some errors in their Mandarin, but also there were some documents that were leaked, um, that Sun said there also had a lot of like grammatical errors that wouldn't necessarily be standard for government documents. So,
Yeah, so those are two different things.
right,
Like the BBC one, I think it's just so that's John Sudworth, and he recently fled China because he was being sued by people. But they just mistranslated one of the interviews. Like you hear the student speaking Mandarin, and the subtitles they put up just don't match. So it's not that the student's Mandarin is bad; it's just that
mm-hmm,
the BBC deliberately mistranslated. And the batch of leaked documents you mentioned, so that's New York Times. And
right,
I mean, it is just kind of speculation, but if you read through it, there are a lot of awkward phrases. There are a couple of typos, and typos in Chinese are a little bit more difficult to do,
mm-hmm,
in my opinion, because Carl, I don't know if you saw this, but they confuse like, I think it's like Qiu and Yin or something like that. Two characters that look similar, but their opinion is completely different. So you would not make that mistake by typing it, right? It's just it's a strange kind of a strange thing. There are two of them like that, and then the rest is just some
And it's not
strange
in
grammatical
handwriting, right? It was
structures.
print form.
Right, it's typed up like it's so I have no idea how you would make that mistake typing,
Well, I
but
mean,
it's
maybe if you're being overly generous, maybe they're not using the pinyin input. Maybe they're using
that's
kind of
true.
like, yeah.
But the New York Times said they hired someone to retype up the documents because they
Oh,
were afraid showing the originals would, betray their
that is
source or
weird.
whatever. So it's strange. That's all I'll say. Like
That is weird. And I do also remember a Georgetown professor, James Millward, who was being touted as a Xinjiang expert. He also translated this supposedly like a text message sent in WeChat by this supposedly inmate held in the Xinjiang detention, and what he provided the translation was totally, I mean, yeah, it didn't match. The English translation actually didn't match the Chinese. And then he actually produced like two different versions of the same message. It's very odd. But I just wanted to point out that there was a shift in the language policy when People's Republic were founded, because before the communists come to power in China, the Chinese Nationalist Party KMT, they under Chiang Kai-shek did pursue a assimilationist policy all across China, in especially in China's outlying ethnic regions, and including Xinjiang. One of the major break, when the Communist Party came to power in China after People's Republic was founded, was the idea of ethnic autonomy, and that included language rights. So, like this in China, there's Xinjiang is known as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, just like there's Inner Mongolia autonomous region, and the Guangxi Zhuang autonomous region, and Ningxia Hui autonomous region. And in these different autonomous regions, one of the thing that set them apart from standard provinces is that they the ethnicities, that the dominant ethnicity in these autonomous regions, they're entitled to be educated in their own language. So they have, so Xinjiang, the Uyghur education in Xinjiang had been in place since 1949, right? And that's not something you can say about a lot of the Anglo settler societies in the West, like Australia, right, Canada, or United States. Because in Xinjiang, until very recently, you could go through the entire education system from kindergarten to college to be wholly educated in Uyghur, and that was just not possible in the United States. So I do want to point that out.
And many places in Europe. Like in France, in the Breton region, they speak a Celtic language, and they just got the rights from France to be able to have, I think it's 3 hours of language education in Breton, guaranteed, which is not, normally what France does. But even in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, they're fighting for language rights still. And this is in Europe, this is in the Anglosphere. So I think it's quite ironic. I think it's quite hypocritical for this to be a major talking point against the Chinese, because it doesn't match with the values of the United States and Europe, or at least Western Europe, who work tirelessly to stand up minority languages.
Yeah, the whole kind of objection, people are raising of teaching Mandarin in school in Xinjiang is because this past policy of in the past policy in Xinjiang, you could choose to go whether to be wholly educated in Uyghur or wholly educated in standard Mandarin. What the Chinese government have done in more recent years is they try to introduce bilingual education in Xinjiang, so people would not just master Uyghur, but they will also be proficient in standard Mandarin, because that's kind of the lingua franca in China to enable people in Xinjiang to be able to interact with people from other parts of China. And I'm kind of flabbergasted about this kind of opposition to the introduction of bilingual education, because it seems like they're trying to hold China to some kind of impossible standards that's not even the case in, like you say, in most of the West.
And even more sinister is that media is deliberately mistranslating and misrepresenting um, the Mandarin language and kind of weaponizing it in a way that that people just have to accept in the West, because we don't speak Mandarin. We can't read the Chinese letters unless like you really really study them. So
And what's funny is there's a deliberate attempt to introduce some kind of the Chinese English, right? Like, because I read Adrian Zenz report. Adrian Zenz is this German researcher for Victim of Communism organization, who is the go-to expert on Xinjiang quote unquote genocide. And I read his report, and he continually used this term de-extremification. I mean, in Chinese, it's just called 去极端化, which there's already an existing English term called, will be de-radicalization, right? But he chose to use this term de-extremification. I mean, just make it sounds purposely to make it sound like funny or alien or like just like some kind of Chinese English term. Yeah, which I think it's quite funny.
The New York Times documents that was headlined with the quote "absolutely no mercy" too, right? And since it was in the headline, you would just assume that, oh, this is China talking about the Uyghurs, that are going to show them no mercy. But you have to dig quite deep to find out that that specific quote is about terrorism. We should show no mercy in dealing with terrorism. So they're very clever at this, right? You have the latitude with the translation itself, and then you can kind of move the context around and let people just make their own assumptions.
Oh, and that famous quote when they talk about when they translate literally, they did a literal translation of the Chinese idiom 粉身碎骨, right? And I think they translate into English as grounding the body into dust and crush the bones or something. Like it just sounds very bloodthirsty. And like, but the idiom in original Chinese actually means doing the utmost. It's like it's like doing utmost sacrifice to achieve an aim, right? But they turn it around, turning into kind of like an action, what the Chinese Communist Party will do to its people to crush their body and ground their bone into dust. And
it's almost comical, isn't it? It's like you want to laugh, but you want to scream and like throw your computer out of the window, right? Like it's so frustrating. Like all you can do is laugh and to keep yourself from crying at it, right? It's
yeah, that's literally what I do. Like when I talk about this on my podcast, people ask me why do I laugh so much. But I mean, like, what? That's kind of my coping mechanism. What can you do except laugh? This is so ridiculous.
Right. And Sun, I'm sure going through all of this is like really, really tedious and quite stressful. So thank you for doing that. I remember reading that piece you wrote, which I'll link in the video description, where you broke down that terrible BBC video. So can you tell us a bit about your methodology when you're going through these? Like, what do you look for? What are a couple of the most important things that stick out to you that automatically assign propaganda?
So that was the first one that really, and honestly, it was just kind of on a whim, because I saw this video and I was like, wow, like, they're dimming the lights just to make everything look gray at the onset. So I just sat down and watched it and like paused it and wrote down everything that I thought was weird, and I did that for like another one about this disappearing mosque where they claim that China demolished a 500-year-old mosque, and all their evidence was just through satellite photos. And I looked back at it a year later and it's still there. In fact, they just kind of renovated it. There's a new plaza out front. It looks much nicer. So I don't really write as many things like this or, I did do like a thread on a new claim because they can always produce more, right? And it's just nonstop. They can produce this stuff faster than you can write articles, like, breaking it down. So I guess I would just start with like this kind of principle. Like if they're making a claim that China is doing something evil just to be evil, you can probably dismiss it. Like no government operates like that, right? Like organ harvesting is a good example. Like it's a fucking pain to do that, to like, store organs, remove them, all that. You need a lot of infrastructure. It's expensive. You need to import a lot of medical chemicals for that. Like, what's the point? If you're just
Also
trying to
look
like
at
kill people, just kill them, right?
also
Nobody
look at
does
the
that.
source. Also
Yeah.
look at the source. The organ harvesting claim is explicitly, almost exclusively come from the Falun Gong cult, right? Which has its axe to grind against the Chinese Communist
Mm-hmm.
government, and that's like if you look more into what other claims that Falun Gong claims, it kind of become obvious that a lot of times their claims are very preposterous and out
Yeah.
there. And people like just recently on Twitter, one of the Falun Gong lady, Jennifer Zen, she just tweeted out that there's so many people in Wuhan just visited graves in the past few days that kind of maybe points to like the extent that China was hiding the death of the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, she is Chinese. She's from China. She know it was the tomb sweeping day. That's the traditional day when Chinese go to visit the tomb of their ancestors. I mean, she knew that, but she intentionally spin it in a way that it's somewhat believable for the Western audience who are maybe ignorant of the Chinese culture.
What's her
And
motive behind that? Like why would she do that? Why would Chinese people promote these like harrowing stories about um essentially their own people in their own country? Why would they do this?
It's a cult. They see China as under the control of this evil party that is trying to destroy like Chinese culture. That's why you see those Shenyun ads, and they're like, we're the true preservers of Chinese history. So, they don't think they're doing anything bad. They think they're waging like a righteous cause to liberate China from like the evil party, right? So they're
yeah,
going to do a
but
lot of things.
they do a lot of things because their English facing media also just basically devoted to push all the QAnon conspiracies and buying all the ads in Facebook to promote Trump. I mean, they're like full kind of had gone full Trump since since the last few years. And they're just really out there. I mean, like anybody from the Chinese community will tell you these are these people are like those people with a wacko conspiracy theories. Like it's like actually a American independent journalist Yasha Levine just he wrote about this. He called this weaponizing immigrants, which U.S. have traditionally been doing so. They did that with kind of the Ukrainian immigrants, and then also the Soviet Jewish immigrants against against the former Soviet Union and now Russia, right? And they also do that with the Persian diaspora against Iran. And then the Chinese uses the Chinese dissident community against China. It's an old trick. And also the people who in this community, they also know how to tell the stories their audience want to hear, right? I mean, like back in the Cold War, I remember a story that the Chinese, the U.S. intelligence agency in Hong Kong, they will hire these people to translate newspaper clippings from China to try to glean information about China under Mao, right? And very soon later what they realize is these the people they hire, they figure out very fast what these their CIA handlers wants to hear, so they can start to making up very fabulous stories about China, the red China. So this is really like nothing new.
It's one of the it really is nothing new, and I'm always really surprised when these stories come out and people believe them, but then in retrospect they're like, oh yeah, it turns out we were being lied to, but it's too late, then hundreds of thousands of Iraqis are dead, or there's an open slave trade in Libya, and the patterns are there. Like, this is what the US empire knows is going to get the job done. As long as American people believe that, as long as US citizens believe that the goals of the United States are to get rid of like a horrible genocide or human rights abuse or overreach of some, of an evil dictatorship.
I just want to use this chance to vent a little bit. I mean, there are people who know who know about US propaganda against Cuba, against Venezuela, against Syria, against Iraq, against Libya, against Russia, etc. But they still believe everything they've been told about China. How does that work?
Yes,
can you just be a little bit skeptical?
Right. That's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you both, and get a response from both of you. I want to make sure that Sun gets a chance to answer this too. So a lot of folks in the U.S. like regret the Iraq War, but seem to be endorsing this Cold War with China. Why is China the exception? Like, what's going on here?
There's a lot of reasons, but I think the first one is that China is big and scary. And it's easy for a lot of people to sympathize with smaller countries like Venezuela, Bolivia. I think people on the left in America naturally say want to defend those, right? It's a big bully US picking on a small country. And so they have sympathies for those countries in Cuba as well. But with China, like China is big and scary, and while they're richer than us, they're taking our jobs. Like there's been a lot of narratives that have been there, long before China was seen as a threat to the U.S. Like when I grew up here, they talked about how China was poisoning our pets and our children with lead paint in the toys and things like that, right? So there's been some conditioning to think negatively of China, and also it's big and scary, and all of that adds up to, hey, I'm willing to believe these things about China because, well, there are people that eat dogs, right? So it's not that wild to imagine that they're also doing all these other bad things. There's a bit of Orientalism there as well, right? Like Americans travel to Mexico for vacation, other things. Spanish is not as foreign to them. Spanish-speaking countries, not as foreign to them as, the vast and mysterious Orient. So there's a lot of things at work there, but, those are some of the things I definitely wanted to mention.
I think that there's a lot to unpack there, and I agree with some. Actually, back when in the before 80s, when China was poor, there were actually I think I remember there used to be a more sympathy about China from US, from the left, because China was seen as an underdog, right? And China was poor, and this need our help, so to speak, and whereas now China is seems threatening, and it's threatening. I mean, if you really look at what is China really threatening here, China is threatening the US hold on its hegemonic position in the world. And I think that's very unsettling for a lot of people who are being used to live through all their life in the hegemonic power like United States. And also it's so I'm at a loss for words here, and the whole we also have been subjected to propaganda about China for decades. It didn't just start. It was Trump. It started like 1949. Ever since PRC was founded, there have been a non-stop propaganda about China. There would be, back then the talk is who lost China, as if like China was United States to lost in the first place. And there that kind of carries over. The what we have, there's so much ignorance plus years and years propaganda, and like people, we need to like kind of deprogram. It's hard to deprogram yourself on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into this recent New York Times article. It was New York Times, right?
New Yorker, I think, the most recent
New
one.
Yorker.
The New Yorker. So this a friend actually reached out to me, and he was telling me that he thinks a lot of the stuff that I'm posting on about China like really concerns him, and he seemed to really reach out in good faith, but we are disagreeing on this issue, and so he's
So I like to say I
extend an olive branch to talk about this, because he's like certain that this is a genocide and certain that the Uyghurs are being eradicated, and I don't necessarily think that that's true. But he sent me that New Yorker article, and it's a really really sad article. But and it seems no one wants to be an asshole and be like, yeah, this person is lying. But sometimes when I read these things, I'm like, is this person even real? Like my conspiracy theory brain turns on, and I'm just like, I know that I am being lied to right now. Like, it feels like I'm being lied to. I had the same feeling about Syria. I had the same feeling about Venezuela. I had the same feelings about Libya. So what are some of the key elements in the xenophobic media, especially this article, that indicate we're being lied to? What sticks out to you that is like just a blatant, outright lie?
So
okay,
Carl,
so
I know you want to talk about the riot framing, but
yes.
specific to this one, you mentioned to me before about how she met all of these characters in one small camp in Ely. Maybe you could start there first, actually, because that seemed like a very, very like crazy detail.
Yeah. So I wanted to read this article, try to understand, because like I do want to give benefit of the doubt, right? I mean, I wanted to read, this possible personal testimonial to just glimpse some kind of information about what's happening inside Xinjiang. So I think this is a very well crafted piece of propaganda, because even as with background knowledge of Xinjiang, and I was reading the article. The article got my emotion aroused. I was very angry. I was very distraught reading this article. But then I started to read some, and I started to notice things that didn't add up. I mean, like one of the obvious thing that stood out to me was the Urumqi riot thing, but we can talk about that later. Is that this person, the Sabit saga, it seems to hit every single one of the media narratives about China and about Xinjiang. It's very neat, just very neatly packaged into her own personal experience. Like I've I like I already know about what happened in Urumqi in 2009. So maybe this is just the writer in the New Yorker writer's own kind of working in his own bias into the article, right? But I wanted to understand Sabit's personal ordeal, her own story. But as I was reading, I noticed something like she met, so she was supposedly detained in this very very remote region in Xinjiang, in the Ili Valley, in the Ili Kazakh autonomous prefecture. And in her detention, in this very far remote corner of China, she met what the New York article termed a Christian sect, a prosecuted Christian sect. This is a Eastern Lightning a sect, a person, right? And then she also met a Falun Gong practitioner, right? And in the end, she also happened to meet the two daughters of, I believe, this person who was working in Radio Free Asia Uyghur service. It's like her. I mean, the only thing that's missing for her story is, the systematic rape and organ harvesting, right? That's the only thing missing from the story. And can maybe Swen, maybe you can enlighten our audience what is the Eastern Lightning sect?
Yeah, sure. And I actually have some personal experience with this group because one of my relatives got caught up in this. Well, I'll put it cult, and I think that's not an unfair term at all. So it's also known as the Church of Almighty God. The core tenet of their belief is actually very similar to something that triggered the Taiping Rebellion in China, in that they believe that Jesus has come back to Earth as a Chinese woman, and she is going to deliver, the world specifically from the scourge of the Communist Party. So it's obviously illegal. They made national news in China when they tried to proselytize a mother in a McDonald's, and when she didn't want to talk to them, ignore them, they killed her in the McDonald's. I think it's even on video, actually, security camera, but it was absolutely brutal, disgusting. So, it's an underground cult. It's illegal. And I had a second or third cousin who was dating someone who was involved, and she started to take him to these meetings and stuff. And he was involved for a couple of months until my dad found out, told his dad, they chewed him out. They basically forced them to break up. But anyway, that was kind of disturbing. So it's a pretty crazy cult, but it's also mostly concentrated in Eastern China. So the fact that one of them would end up that far out, it's one of those strange Christian cults, and Christians don't have a huge presence in Xinjiang in the first place.
Exactly.
Much less in a small place, maybe in a Rumchi you might find some, but in a small place like Yili, that's just absolutely bizarre, right? That's one of those things.
Yeah, exactly. The Eastern Lightning is mostly a cult among the Han Chinese in the Eastern China. And Christianity itself is very small in Xinjiang for obvious reasons, because it's very small among the Turkic population in Xinjiang, because the Turkic population in Xinjiang have been majority Muslim, right? And there are Uyghur converts to Christianity, but there are few and in between. And Eastern Lightning, that's a very specific sect that's opposing the Chinese government, and they actually host didn't they host a website, Bitter Winter?
Sure. Yeah, Bitter Winter is run by them. So it's a website that claims to be about general religious persecution in China, and they have articles about China oppressing just mainline Christian denominations as well as Muslims and even Buddhists. But if you just go to their website and you search for their articles on Eastern Lightning, suddenly the whole website format changes. It's got all these nice Photoshop photos of happy Eastern Lightning worshipers, and the article tone changes to 10 myths you've been told about the Church of Almighty God. So if you've ever run into that website, yes, it is run by the Eastern Lightning people.
Yeah. So and also, I just, just the idea that they will have some Uyghur or Kazakh Eastern Lightning follower, and on top of that, she also met a Falun Gong practitioner in the same detention center, right? Like her detention center is like this really out of the way place in like a really remote area of Yili, like in northwest Xinjiang. it's just too much of a coincidence. And on top of that, she also met the two daughter of Yisha Kokobor, who is like a kind of Uyghur, who is a president of the Uyghur American Association, right? And then one of the Uyghur so-called Uyghur activists who is kind of out in the front leading this campaign against China, and it's just a little bit too convenient that she in her own detention met all three, not just one Eastern Lightning practitioner, one Falun Gong member, but all three, and the daughter of Yisha Kokobor. It's just a little bit too convenient for me. That's just besides the red flags that I saw about the description of Urumqi riot in the article itself. Can I switch track to talk about that now? So
I know you really, really want to get into that. I do ask. I would really appreciate, a couple of links and resources to who these people are, so that I can put them in the description of the video, so that anybody watching it could click on that and read about who these people are. Because I do think it's interesting that in these camps that she would meet these people who are associated with this cult. I would appreciate that information, and we can get into how these Urumqi riots are depicted in media. So go ahead and get into that if you'd like, unless Sun has something else he wants to add to this.
No, go ahead, Carl.
Okay, so this is actually the first red flag I saw in the article, because it's pretty early on. They talk about the Urumqi riots in 2009, which is a very well documented event, and that is kind of the watershed moment of the kind of the Xinjiang ethnic relation in the more recent years. In the paragraph, he laid out, the writer, that's Rafi Rachidorian, he laid out the lead up to the Urumqi riot pretty well. I mean, he talked about the fight broke out in the toy factory in the southern province of Guangdong. And, he's very detailed in all his description. He left nothing out, right? And he talked about amid the melee, 2 Uyghur employees were killed by a Han mob. That is true. And the next month, hundreds of Uyghurs took to the street of Xinjiang's capital city, Urumqi, waving Chinese flag and chanting Uyghur, a call to be seen by country's leadership. Okay, that's also true. Now this is the pivotal event of Urumqi riot on July 5th, 2009 is described in one sentence. The police cracked down and the riots erupted. Hundreds of people were injured and killed. Hundreds were arrested. More than 40 Uyghurs were presumed disappeared. Dozens were later sentenced to death. Now, if you know nothing about Xinjiang, and if you know nothing about the Urumqi riot of July 5th, 2009, what do you think he's describing here?
Yeah. So I honestly don't have an answer for it.
I mean, to me, obviously, he's just from reading this passage, it seems it's very straightforward. He's saying that the police cracked down the what he's implying is the police cracked down the 100 Uyghur activists,
Mhm.
and then he said hundreds of people were injured or killed and hundreds were arrested, right? With no ethnicity provided, right? This is very natural assumption that these hundreds of people who were killed and hundreds of people are arrested were all part of the protest that got cracked down by the police, right? And after that, it says more than 40 Uyghurs were presumed disappear, dozens later sentenced to death. So for anybody who didn't know the history of June 5th Urumqi riot, you would think he's talking about a police crackdown that killed hundreds of people, right? Hundreds of people arrested, and 40 Uyghur disappeared, and then they were sentenced to death, presumably for the protest. That sounds like a very reasonable reading from based
Right.
on this passage, no?
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that is
Okay.
the way
Yeah.
that. Yes. I'm
Okay, so for people who want to learn more about the July 5th, 2009 Urumqi riot, you can look it up. Just Google it. I mean, the event is quite well documented. There's a the origin is he's not wrong to say it, because it sparked off. There was a riot down in Guangdong province earlier in the year because Chinese government had this program to recruit Uyghur workers from Xinjiang to come work in Guangdong, because this is part of kind of the Chinese government's poverty alleviation effort, because there weren't enough jobs being created in Xinjiang, so they thought to bring the Uyghur to where jobs are. The Chinese government were given out tax incentive to the factories owners in the coast, like in Guangdong, where they produce like things for export to the West, to hire these Uyghur laborers. But what happened? This is 2009, so just right when the great financial crisis happened, there was a huge, like basically all the Western economy just cratered. You cut off all the export. Many Chinese workers were laid off around this time, and it's also around this time, it's still some Uyghur workers were still being recruited as part of the Chinese government program, and that created resentment. And in 2009, early 2009, there was a case where a Han girl who went inside of the dormitories to look for her boyfriend, and what happened is people heard her scream, and then she ran out of the dormitory later, and that quickly fed an internet rumor mill, which I was eyewitness firsthand, because I'm like terminally online, and I was browsing through Chinese forum on that day, and I saw somebody made a post claiming that a Han girl who accidentally went to the Uyghur side of the dormitory and got gang raped, and the authorities trying to hush up because they don't want kind of the government policy of bringing Uyghur workers to Guangdong being criticized. So they're trying to cover. There's a government cover up of the situation. So that sparked a huge riot. Like that internet post went viral. There was a large mob gathered to storm the Uyghur factories, and in the end, two Uyghur workers ended up dead. And that lead up to the protest, which was talked about in this article, in the July 5th, 2009. The protest, so the protester went to the provincial, the seat of the provincial government in Urumqi, demanding the government basically punish the perpetrators. So now, this Guangdong riot just happened, right? There's still investigation going on. And what happened next is the protester dispersed, into the surrounding regions because they couldn't get through to the provincial building because provincial buildings were protected by heavy security. Now there is a claim by Uyghur activists to claim that the immediate cost was the security fired on the crowd, leading the crowd to go to the surrounding neighborhood to go on revenge rampage. But as of yet, I haven't, besides this kind of overseas Uyghur exiles claim, we haven't seen any pictures or videos. But we are pretty, what followed is pretty well established. Is a crowd went into the surrounding neighborhood and they start to indiscriminately beat up all the Han Chinese they could find. And this was the evening rush hour when all the office workers are returning home from work, and a lot of the bus routes took them through these neighborhoods. So people were stopping buses, dragging people out of the buses and beating them on the ground. And in the end, near 200 people were killed, and over thousands people injured. And this is most of the victims are Han Chinese. So 197 people died, and 1,721 people injured. Right. This is where the majority victims are Han Chinese in Urumqi. Now, you would not get this story from reading this paragraph, right? And it seems like this paragraph took pains to disguise the ethnicity of the people who actually got killed, right? It doesn't mention ethnicity at all when he talks about casualties, but whereas before he talks about Uyghur protests, and in the end you talk about dozen Uyghur sentenced to death, right? Like, this is intentionally misleading. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Sun? Sun Feiyang, hello?
Sorry. Yeah, I was on mute while I was talking, but yeah, it's absolutely deliberate. Like, people who have been brought up on 1989 June 4th images of the Chinese police, military, and massacring students. The New Yorker knows that. They write it this way. People automatically think, they're just doing what they do again, right? So it's all deliberately written like that. And the author can be like, well, I didn't actually say all the victims are Uyghur, but they understand that the audience will draw their own conclusions, and their minds will fill in the gaps there. So, as you mentioned, it's very clever.
Yeah, as I said, this is very well crafted propaganda and narrative. Like, for people who are ignorant of, unless people who really pay attention to Xinjiang, knew what happened on July 5th, 2009, they would totally be misled by this. It's hard, this is playing on people's ignorance. This is the first major red flag when I read this article, and later on, I start to have doubts when I saw all this coincidence in Sabit's own personal story about meeting member of the cults Eastern Lightning and then Falun Gong, and then Ishat Kokobor's daughters. But then in the end, the writer himself acknowledged, he was helped along in his writing by, guess what? Who the person he acknowledged, Adrian Zenz, again, the go-to source for all the Xinjiang atrocity porn, right? And this German researcher employed by by Victim of Communism Institute. He in fact, the writer on his tweet, he tweeted out the article, and he even made another acknowledgement. He said some of those people who are active on Twitter, you should follow them if you want to keep up the issue. Adrian Zenz topped that list, and Adrian Zenz then actually he actually quoted and admitted that he met Sabit first, and then he found her story, her story just flawless, just perfect, and then he, especially vivid, her memory of all the vivid details. Adrian Zenz is a person that convinced Rafi Kachidorian of New Yorkers to write this article to talk to Sabit. So to me, it seems like Adrian Zenz help coaching, either help coaching Sabit, or this is something that it seems like Adrian Zenz just admitted to kind of orchestrate this whole narrative in close cooperation with a New Yorker writer. What do you think, Mr. Sun?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of jarring to see, but he's basically, oh yeah, I encouraged her to tell this story because it was just such in vivid detail. We'll link to this tweet later so you can provide it. But I do encourage people to familiarize themselves with Adrian Zenz. Like he is probably the most cited person in all of these articles and news that you hear about Xinjiang. He's cited so much, and he's probably accumulated somewhat of a reputation that I've seen people share articles and even specifically caveat. Now, this one isn't from Adrian Zenz, so that's definitely a red flag there.
He's like one of the two originator of the claim that 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camp. That's why he's like kind of the unquestioned source of the Xinjiang narrative. And another fact I want to point out, even in the Adrian Zenz's own report, he said, the 1 million is an estimate that he came up. He said it's not unreasonable to say up to 1 million people, Uyghur, may have been held in detention in concentration camp. That's his exact words in his report. But in the media that quoting Adrian Zenz, that up to part just drops off, and it just becomes 1 million Uyghur in concentration camp quoted as a fact. That now all people talking about Xinjiang issue, they always talk about 1 million Uyghur in concentration camp. That itself already taken as a fact, as a given fact, when in fact it was based on a very sketchy report from very sketchy, like Adrian Zenz based on his report from supposedly a leaked Chinese government a document from a Uyghur exile organization in Turkey, which has been, promoting East Turkestan, not East Turkestan, the Turkestan Islamic Party, that's active in Syria, right? Mm-hmm. This is a group of Uyghur jihadist organization that's the affiliate of Al-Qaeda that had been active in the Syrian war for almost 10 years, and they have thousands of fighters in the Idlib province of northwest Syria, right? So this is the kind of the people he's working with, those people supposedly provided Adrian Zenz with a document, and based on this document, Adrian Zenz then extrapolated the figure of maybe up to 1 million. And the other source for this claim is by the NED funded NGO based in Washington, the China Human Rights Defender. Their they're the first one who surfaces claim in the mainstream media, and their report of 1 million Uyghur in concentration camp figure came from extrapolation based on their supposedly interview with 8 Uyghur villagers from 8 separate villages in southern Kashgar prefecture, and then based on that testimonial, supposedly, then they extrapolated to the whole Uyghur population of Xinjiang, and so that's how they came up with a 1 million Uyghur figure. Like, this is what we have right now. All we know about the source, the 2 main source of the 1 million Uyghur in concentration camp. I just like to point that out.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, Adrian Zenz has never been to China. And I feel like if you're reporting on something and making these types of claims, I think it's really important that
he claimed he was in China as a tourist, I think back in 2000s or something, like just briefly. But before he became the go-to media expert on Xinjiang, he was a sort of a fiction writer. His
fiction
first
writer. Okay.
I mean, like, you can still find his book online. Can you remind me, Sun, what's that book he wrote on the rapture?
Sun actually had to dip out for a moment for another meeting. I told him to check back in with us to see if we were still here when he was finished. But I will link.
Oh, sorry, I found it. It's called "Worthy to Escape," by Adrian Zenz. Worthy to escape: Why all believers will not be raptured before tribulation.
Oh my God.
This is Adrian Zenz's best known work before he switched track to be the expert on Xinjiang.
Wow.
You can find his book on Amazon.
I'm sure we can find a PDF of that. Don't buy that. Carl, something else I noticed in this New Yorker article is the second section. It's called Like Rats. Actually, you know what? Wait. There's something I do want to address before I move on to this. This article, actually particularly in this section too, they acknowledge that terrorism is happening. And there's an ABC article from 2003, 2004, and it's called "Is Xinjiang a New Front for Al-Qaeda?" or something like that, to that effect. And I think it's really interesting how Western media acknowledges that, like, groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Daesh are taking root in this area, and somehow they're still blaming or still assigning genocide to this to China's anti-terrorist activities. I mean, if every year
I also like, before we get to go on, I also like to point out there is a February 19th article from the Foreign Policy, which said the State Department lawyer said there's not enough evidence to indicate a genocide in Xinjiang. This is U.S. State Department here. I mean, like for all the people who are saying, it's wrong to, how can you be genocide denier,
right,
on Xinjiang?
right.
This is, the genocide label was thrown out by Michael Pompeo on his way out of office as his kind of legacy building exercise. That's when he kind of started to label China, genocide. And then obviously the Biden administration is trying to, slow walk from that, kind of back that. I think that's what made that why the reason for that Foreign Policy article on the State Department lawyer saying, oh, actually there is not enough evidence. Let me try. Oh, I found it. It says the foreign policy exclusive from February 19. State Department lawyers concluded insufficient evidence to prove genocide in China. Okay, so here we go. It's not this. This is straight from the U.S. State Department.
It's so funny to me. It's like when the lie is exposed, somehow the lie is still the truth, and they still like people still hold on to this. No, it's genocide. But when the State Department says, oh well, we don't have any evidence to substantiate these claims, it's too late. And they rely on this. It's too late. It's too late to walk back our invasion of Iraq. It's too late to, you can't unkill Gaddafi. Like, you can't undo this manufactured consent. So the damage is done, and people want a response. People expect the United States to do something and save the Uyghurs. And so back to this New Yorker article, the second section is called like rats. And I just want to read this paragraph out loud. As Sabit was deciding to move to Canada in 2014, a dark future was being mapped out for Xinjiang in secret meetings in Beijing. Xi Jinping had become president the year before, and he was consolidating power. As he cleared away obstacles to lifelong rule, he eventually subjected more than 1 million government officials to punishments that ranged from censorship to execution. With China's ethnic minorities, he was no less fixated on control. Like, that is just, and I love that.
It's just
like that's so.
Yeah, that whole paragraph, it just seems like Xi Jinping is just this crazy person that just decided this is what he's gonna do. He's in power. He's gonna kill 1 million government officials, and then he also wanted to do that to Uyghur. And this is kind of conveniently. This is it's all about narrative, right? Yes, there are 1 million government officials in China have been arrested on corruption charges, right? And that's what they don't mention. Why is this 1 million government officials? Like it's like, oh, Xi Jinping just decided that he's gonna put the pain on the government officials for no reason, right? Like, what he doesn't mention is, yes, the 1 million government officials were removed from their position and being charged with corruption. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry if I interrupted you.
No, you didn't interrupt. I appreciate you adding to that, because that is also like a really clever way to kind of not only acknowledge what's happening, but to kind of spin it so that it fits a particular narrative that the U.S. is trying to drive home, and it make it, and the title, like rats, I think it's just so it's just so conveniently placed. Like, it's right there. They want to make president, or he's not even the president. They want to make Xi Jinping out to be a rat, and I think that is just so racist. I think that is just so despicable, that people would share and believe these kinds of things uncritically.
It's like kind of the same playbook about U.S. employee about any leaders of any government they don't like. It's always some crazy tin pot dictator, right? Like that's always crazy out there. All his action can be the reason he's doing all these outrageous things we're accusing him of doing, because he's crazy, he's irrational. So right. That's why he's doing all these things, and they don't explain. Maybe this is actually the reason behind this, and also I give it to them for writing this very well crafted propaganda piece. It's just so long. It took me like a long time to read through all of it because I really wanted to just find out what happened to Sadiq. But it keep on getting interspersed about this paragraph about how Xi Jinping is evil and you know the Chinese government is doing this, doing that. I'm like I'm just want to find out what happened. I'm like reading it like a story, right? I want to find out what happened next.
Exactly. And the third paragraph in the second section, like rats, I'm just going to read that out loud too because I think it's really interesting. In the 50s, Mao, recognizing that the party's hold on Xinjiang was weak, mobilized the Bingtuan to set up its farms in the region's north, a buffer against potential Soviet incursions. Revolutionaries flooded in with decades of population, and within decades, the population was 40% Han. Party officials, hoping to assimilate the indigenous residents, sought to strip away their traditions, their Muslim faith, their schools, even their native languages. The authorities came to regard Uyghur identity as mistaken. Uyghurs were Chinese. And things that stick out to me the most in this paragraph are the words like flooded and assimilate indigenous residents. The indigenous, there's like, it's always been a multi-ethnic, multicultural area from the history that you gave and the other stuff that I've read. I've got a couple of books that I'm trying to get through right now. And particularly, I think it's interesting that people like Han people were going to the north of the region where that was unsettled. There was nobody living there. And that was an intentional thing because the Chinese government didn't want to displace the people who were living there. So they went to an uninhabited area. Is that correct? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So there were two waves of major waves of the Han migration into Xinjiang. One is the earlier wave after 1760 that I mentioned, by the Qing imperial bureaucrats. They're trying to settle the depopulated north. And then in the second wave that this article referred to in the 1950s, yes, most of the Han migrants, they were in the area north of Tianshan Mountains, like I mentioned, the area that formerly known as kind of the Zhuangge region. And they usually migrated to sparsely populated areas, and then that were made kind of productive by building irrigation canals to fit those areas. So yeah, I mean that because they also recognize that if you move to different ethnic groups with vast different traditions in close proximity, that might lead to some ethnic tension. So that's one of the reasons. And and go ahead, sorry.
That sticks out to me is that last line: the authorities came to regard Uyghur identity as mistaken. Uyghurs were Chinese. But this is trying to assign Han culture as the default culture. They're equating Chinese Han, but that's not correct. Han and Chinese are like separate identities. China is a multi-ethnic, plural nationalist country with many ethnic.
So on the Chinese currency RMB, there's actually multiple languages printed out on the bill. Uyghur language is one of them. You can actually find in 1980s, when I lived in China, the 1980s edition of the Chinese RMB, one I think I'm trying to remember the denomination. I'm trying to remember it's 2 yuan or 2 jiao. They have the pictures of different ethnicities on the bill, and one of the bill has Uyghur have the Uyghur people on the bill. I'm trying to find it now. I'm trying to
Yeah.
Google it.
Well,
I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
yeah, please, 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 please. Send me millions of links if you've got them. I'm really, really interested in this stuff. But something else that my well-intended friend brought up to me was that he thought taking this war on terror narrative was dangerous, and I think that for Americans, when they were, trying to fight a war on terror, people in the United States were being manufactured to fight a war that was based on
So
lies, and um, so they're assigning this
I'd
framework.
like to I'd like to point out there's a lot of the U.S. Narratives about China. There's a lot of projection.
Yeah,
There's a lot of projection about what U.S. is doing, currently doing. Project that onto China. Just assume like, okay, these Chinese will just act exactly as what we will do to the world, or what we will do, what we do to our own, to like to Americans, to the immigrants in our country is exactly what China do to its own population. This is that kind of underlying assumption that this is the projection about the first, we talk about the settler colonialism, right? That's what U.S. was founded on,
right.
right? And so we assume that must be what China is also doing in its own
Yes.
territory,
That's
right?
something
And
that
then
Dylan and I were
go
talking
ahead.
about. He was like, they're trying to shoehorn imperialism onto China as they fight, actual terrorism that was happening in the region. And I do want to try to get into some of that because I researched a lot of history that places there was like a lot of blame on United States foreign policy for what China has to deal with right now, and like it starts with the Afghanistan, right, and how the Taliban got radicalized because the United States was helping Saudi Arabia print their ideology, their Wahhabist ideology, which radicalized the Mujahideen, which became the Taliban, and then it branched out into all these different sects, and that's how it spilled over into Xinjiang naturally.
That, by the way, the Afghanistan operation, that was the largest CIA operation before Syria. So Operation Cyclone, that's where CIA in close cooperation with Saudi Arabia and the intelligence arm of Pakistan, the ISI, that was the largest CIA operation before the Syrian war. Now we have the Operation Sycamore, which is kind of the successor to that, where U.S. again work with Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Turkey kind of replaced the role of Pakistan, and then funnel all the jihadists all over the world to fight in Syria. Except this time they also included some Uyghur from Xinjiang, and that in 19 this happened. Actually, I was still in China when the first big incident happened in 1990s, early part of 1990s. Some kind of Uyghur Mujahideen coming back from Afghanistan. They started in the Baran County, in the Kashgar prefecture. They somehow were able to stash a whole cache of weapons, and they led attack against the local government structures, and that was being put down. And I remember kind of the head of the Uyghur American Association, Nuri Turko, who was also the head, at one time, the head of Radio Free Asia Uyghur Service. So Radio Free Asia is like kind of the offshoot of CIA, right? And Nuri Turko went on the podcast Seneca, to talk about Xinjiang issue. He referred to the Bahrain incident in 1990. The way he talked about it is that this was a group of religious conservative people who are concerned about the communist rule, staged uprising. I mean, that's one way to put it. These mujahideens returning from Afghanistan, they're certainly religiously conservative.
Right. I mean,
yeah, but he painted as kind of, this is one instance of the CCP's suppression of religion, right? And whereas, as you mentioned, there are other Islamic cultures in Xinjiang. There's a Hui Muslims and many other Chinese ethnicity who practice Islam. There have not been, there's at least there have not been like claims of being targeted. So yeah. This is. But go ahead. Sorry, I'm just.
This is where I wish Sun were still here, because we watched this video by Bad Empanada together.
Yes.
Yeah.
I watched the same video actually.
Oh, you did? Oh, great. Okay. So one of the things he mentions is that the communist, the evil Chinese Communist Party was saying that signs of radicalization or extremism were like beards and burqas and stuff like that, and that the Uyghur Muslims have not, that's not part of their culture, that's not part of their interpretation of Islam, and it's the same with the Hui. They don't wear burqas, they don't wear, most Muslim groups don't have the beards, they don't have that's a sign of the Wahhabist Salafist.
This is again, is kind of the people, like the Western people, taking their own projection, their own, like, what they think should be the Islam, how it should be practiced, project out to other regions. And one example of this, actually remember, I remember also, listening to our podcast on actually a Chinese American woman who worked for one of the think tanks in Washington, focus on the China and Xinjiang issue. She actually talked about how she first come to know about Xinjiang on some a trip that she took to China, and she went to Xinjiang, and she met the local Muslim, and she was like, that's not Islam, that's not how Islam is practiced, because prior to that she was one of those expat brat who was raised in UAE. So that's kind of her conception of, like how Islam should be. And then she went to China, and she's like, first her reaction was, oh, these Xinjiang people, they're Chinese? I mean, even though she's Chinese American herself, and her reaction is like, oh, how come they look so different? How they're Chinese? And then the second reaction was like, oh, that's not really Islam. They're not like, why are they not wearing burqas, right? Why not face veil?
Right. Yeah. Another gosh, we haven't even gotten into the people living in Turkey, the Uyghurs living in Turkey, who are part of the ETIM. Vice did an interview with them, and I was like, that was the first time where I really felt confident that I was being lied to about this whole thing, because they've got the flag, that blue flag with the white moon and the stars on it, and I just, it just makes me really sad. It makes me really, really frustrated.
So actually, so finally there was article Associated Press by Jerry Shi he went to Turkey to interview kind of the Uyghur diaspora there. This, I think it's from 2017, I want to say 2017 or 2015 article. I talk about the jihadist issue, because one of the things he talked about was how prevalent the effect, how Uyghur diaspora in Turkey was affected. Like every community member he talked to knew somebody who went over to Syria. Because that's a group that have been kind of pressured and induced, enticed to go to Syria. At the time, Turkey government worked out some deal with government of Malaysia. So the Turkish consulate in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, were giving Turkish passport to any Uyghurs who came asking. And so that allowed them to board a flight to fly from Kuala Lumpur to Istanbul. But as soon as they got off the flight at the airport, they're greeted by jihadist recruiters who encouraged them to go on to Syria. That's how there several thousand fighters ended up in Syria. Uyghur fighters ended up in Syria in first place. And the Jirishi article, despite all its there's still propaganda in there, but it still have some basic facts that the Turkish the Uyghur diaspora community in Turkey has been disproportionately affected by all these jihadist organizations running into their community, trying to recruit people to go to Syria. Like in this article, he literally said everybody he interviewed knew somebody who went over to Syria.
And that is part of why I think that China is doing this crackdown, is because it's very common for people to know or be associated with people who went and trained with jihadists in Syria. And this is where
I address go back to one of the early issue that you raised about people's objection about how China is employed this kind of the U.S. war on terror narrative. U.S. specifically use a war on terror narrative to provide cover for its interventionist war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, right? That's how we got there. In China, first of all, despite this presence of Uyghur fighters in Syria, China did not send its aircraft carrier to Syria to bomb. China did not send its military to Syria, and China's and domestically, I just posted a group of these terrorist incident footages on my Twitter, and there are people in the comments say, "Oh, well, why do you post that?" Or people say you are just justifying punishing the whole population. But first of all, I'm like, wait, who told you, the whole whole Uyghur population is being punished? One of the things, that doesn't justify to put the whole Uyghur population in camp. Like, not even the craziest CIA report is claiming 12 million Uyghur in Xinjiang has been put in camp, right? I mean,
right. I found that Associated Press article that you were talking about, the Jerry Sheikh one. I think
there's some spin in the article that made it seems like the Uyghur fighters went to Syria because because of Chinese oppression, which totally did not compute, because if there's Chinese oppression, why are you going to Syria to fight against Assad? That
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah. I just a quick scan of this Associated Press article. I found this paragraph here. Um, Around the time Kari watched the jihadi recruiters whisk Uyghurs from the airport in 2015, the Turkestan Islamic Party announced a string of suicide attacks in Syria. That September, Uyghurs bombed downtown Bangkok filled with tourists. Later that year, the head of Al Qaeda began denouncing China as atheist occupiers and courted Uyghur fighters in recruitment videos. So a couple things that I have noticed with this atheist occupiers thing is that that they're framing Han Chinese people as invaders to a place where they've lived for 2,000 years or more, and with these recruitment videos, CGTN actually released like a documentary, and they showed some of this footage. And I actually cannot share that on Facebook. Like I tried to share it in like Facebook messages. It won't even let me private message people that video.
Facebook has been doing some weird police, like not weird, but like serious policing lately. I noticed that too. Like you there are just certain things they won't let you post. Yeah.
Yeah, it's trying to read these articles is quite confusing sometimes. It's a little disorienting because they add these facts, they give this history, they say, oh, these terrorist attacks are happening, and then a few paragraphs later they'll try to criminalize the government
There's
in
a lot of mental
hey,
gymnastics they're trying to perform. Like that's why it's very confusing, because they're trying to acknowledge, oh yeah, there's terrorism happening, but it's all because Chinese government's oppressive tactics. That's
right,
the
right.
real reason this happened.
And
And
people
it's
also
like
talk about
it seems like they're still trying to paint the Chinese government as like it's just naturally oppressive. That's what they do. Like they don't need a rhyme or reason to do it. They just want to be oppressive.
yeah, and they also ignore that Xinjiang has its own government, and they don't really acknowledge that that people have control over the government there. That's one of the things that I don't see enough about. Can you touch
Yeah,
on?
I want to talk. Yeah, I want to talk about also that maybe I'll try to talk about that in relation also to the bad empanada video, because the thing, something that he focused primarily on the the Chinese propaganda. You know what, I admit Chinese propaganda sucks. Chinese propaganda is bad. This is like I can publicly acknowledge. This is actually a fact, well known, to people inside China, like people, even a lot of the pro government people in China. They have a joke about how the real enemy is inside the propaganda department. that that's literally a meme in Chinese social media. They call it the 敌在中宣部, which means the real enemy is in the propaganda department. Because the criticism of bad empanada on the propaganda video is valid. Those are valid points. I mean, I agree. It's totally ridiculous that they claim during the BBC tour, the claim that the detainees were there voluntarily. The CGTN own video later acknowledged, that they went to the mandatory detention, for a time. So I mean, I think this is kind of function, kind of this weird idiosyncrasy within the Chinese bureaucracy, because I can see, people who are running these re-education centers slash vocational training center, they want to they want to present themselves in the best light to the outside world, but then at the same time they also, these Chinese bureaucrats, they also don't want to make mistakes that will make them self personally liable. So instead, they don't want to have an incident where BBC will kind of capitalize and leverage to you in their mind. They don't want to create something obvious that BBC can point out to, say, oh, this is questionable or problematic, that then themselves will have to be answered to their own superiors in the bureaucracy why they fucked up, right? So the safest way for them to do this is to do this very formulaic kind of shows that in the end, it probably convinced nobody, but for their own ass got covered, because they show both their superior and also to the press that they're doing something. I mean, okay, they're doing something. Like maybe they didn't do as best they could, but look, they're doing something, and not they're trying to protect China's image. That's why I think sometimes it's good to acknowledge all the shortcomings and actual real problems.
Of course, yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
I get for like China or whatever, or like a tanky. When I just I have questions about what I'm reading, and I have too many people died after being lied to about going to war in Iraq. People I know died, and I think
for us people in the West, I think it's very simple. It's a very simple, because it's anti-imperialism, anti-interventionist war. It's just a good position it's a good stand to make. I mean, like, you see how U.S. continually to justify its interventionist war by claiming its so-called rights to protect, right? It's a humanitarian interventionism, right? But with disastrous results. I mean, it's not hard to say, look, let's just stop imperialism, let's stop intervention, right? To meddle in the places that we may not have all the information. We don't really know about. What we do know about is things inside our own borders. We know very well about the outrage, all the atrocities, human rights violations in our borders. We know about kids in the cages on the border. That's something we actually can have more impact about. What can we do to, say, influence the government action in Syria, in Russia, in China, in Iran, right? Like literally, like, what can we do? Like, just shut up and support U.S. sanction on these countries? Or on the other hand, we actually can influence the U.S. We can have more impact on the U.S. government decisions, like putting kids in cages, right? We can hold our own government accountable. It's like but the media is like, no, don't look here, look over there, right?
They're projecting.
And that's
they're projecting. Yeah, that's what they
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like your stance is like, hey, they lied about us all these years, and then went ahead and did create these humanitarian disasters. Why should I trust you again? I think that's a great stance. I mean, how can it be wrong to be against interventionism abroad, especially when U.S. for whatever, like, even if you give U.S. government a reasonable benefit of doubt that they're somehow doing it for quote unquote good. Look, what do we know about the outside world? We don't even, a lot of us can't even find countries on a map. Like, how do we know about the true situation in Iraq, except for like getting led by noses by people like Chalabi, right? But in fact, that's actually not what happened. We didn't get led by the nose. Chalabi worked in close cooperation with our national security establishment to lead to the result that they had planned for in advance, right? But for us, it's just a good leftist stance to take to be against intervention in general.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what's also tricky is that, people do want to be on the right side of history. They don't want to, sorry, motorcycles keep going by my house. But they want to protect people, and make
Yes.
sure everyone is safe. And but they don't think that by sharing these types of opinions or articles or quote unquote criticisms of China or these manufactured enemies, that they're, in a sense, like they're endorsing intervention. They're endorsing this type of foreign
Yes.
policy. They're endorsing these inevitable sanctions that starve and hurt people. Like the cotton in Xinjiang, for example, that is just one so heinous. A friend of mine from Xinjiang was telling me that the cotton production there is automated, and that like blew my mind. I was like, how can uh, how can they wage this war on an issue they literally just made up, and people fall for it all the time? Like, there's no slave labor picking cotton.
I'll put a little bit caveat on that. So
Yeah.
Xinjiang cotton production in the northern Xinjiang, north of Kansan Mountain, is largely automated
Right.
in those parts. In the southern Xinjiang, there's still areas where cotton is picked manually. And I read Adrian Zenz's report on, so-called Xinjiang slave labor, and his evidence in his own words is that he, according to him, the labor force in southern Xinjiang, in area like Kashgar and Khotan, 80% of the people employed in the cotton industry is locals. That's his evidence. It's because local people are employed in a local industry, and like nowhere does he actually present actual evidence of coercion, of coerced labor. Like he mentioned, like he pulled up some articles from the Chinese media talking about the Chinese cadres go visit these cotton pickers in the field and go work with them, and he used that as an evidence. Like, see, the Chinese officials are watching these people, and because these people face these, because China is carrying out this 1 million Uyghur people, putting 1 million Uyghur people in detention. So these people are in constant threat of being put in detention. So they have to follow the orders of the Chinese officials. So there's implied coercion. Or I'm like, look, that's a really a big reach. Like you don't really need to find evidence. You don't really need to go that hard to find evidence of hard labor to say, for example, in the United States, we have prison laborers here.
Exactly.
It's out in the open. It's not a secret. We do have slave labor of the prisoners.
Right.
And
I use one of the quickest examples I can go to when I'm talking to people about this is like our 13th Amendment says slavery is abolished unless it serves as punishment for a crime, and people don't know. I grew up on the border of Illinois and Iowa, and school desks are made with prison labor. Like
Wow.
our
I did not know
public
that.
schools in Iowa get school desks from prison labor, and people always come, oh well they're getting jobs, they're learning a skill, they're learning a trade, but they could be learning that outside of jail. They could be learning that instead of losing 25 years of their life for weed. And but people can't apply that same framework to what's happening in Xinjiang. And I think there's, we're coded to think that way because there's a lot of racism and yellow peril present in conversation and media about China. And I think that that's
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And
to
I think there's also kind of acceptance of all these injustices that happen in our own border that we kind of just naturally assume that must also be occurring elsewhere, right? Like because China is an upcoming superpower, so they must be doing whatever shit we're doing.
right.
Like like there's all kind of implicit acceptance of, oh yeah, this is just how we got to where we are because we use slave labor to pick cottons, because we
Right.
we genocided the indigenous Native Americans. We put kids in cages. So it's just a natural projection. Again, projection. Yeah, like
Right,
you said.
right. I've been trying to come up with like like it's a standard uh like steps, like things to notice when reading media. And projection is one of them. Like if there's an insecurity of the imperial core that they're projecting onto this nation, like if there's, I that's something that makes me suspicious. If the source is like the same person over and over and over and over again, Adrian Zenz, I'm suspicious. If they're making an enemy out of the government and referring to them as rats or locusts, I'm suspicious. If there's a lot of conjecture, like, and bad history, like I'm suspicious of what I'm
And
reading.
it's and especially like there's just a Reuters article out today. Details of sweeping efforts to counter China emerge in U.S. Senate, and I read the detail. It's almost hilarious how everything is in the open. It stresses a need to prioritize military investment necessary to achieve United States political objectives in the Indo-Pacific. It called for spending to do so, saying Congress must ensure the federal budget is properly aligned with a strategic imperative to compete with China. The bill recommends a total of $655 million in foreign military financing funding for the region, and a total of $450 million for the Indo-Pacific Maritime Security Initiative, et cetera, et cetera. It's like they it's like they don't even try to hide it. The reason they want to push for the military confrontation with China, trying to escalate tension, is to feed the military industrial complex to
Mhm.
kind of it's just, that's why I laugh, because it's so ridiculous.
It really is, and it's really unfair because the people who ultimately lose are the people of Xinjiang. Han and Uyghur people will lose
Yes.
because jihadists, who do they target? They target people who don't follow their specific version of Islam, and
Yes.
that's what Wahhabis do. And this is what the United States foreign policy supports, is that the jihadists work with Saudi Arabia to occupy places of like vast natural resources, gas and oil. And there's a reason they're occupying those areas, because the United States needs to uphold its dollar, which is tied to oil sales. Saudi Arabia
Yep.
is trading oil in US dollar, which heavily inflated our currency. And so it, like when you think about it like that too, it makes a lot of sense. And people aren't putting those pieces together, that there's, the most of natural gas and oil in China is in Xinjiang, but also like in the South China Sea and Hong Kong. And it should be so obvious what's happening. It should be so obvious to us, whether you like China or not, whether whether you think China is socialist or whether you think China is not socialist.
Yep.
Like, it should be obvious what is happening. It's
It
right there.
should,
Right there.
I mean, it should be obvious, especially to people on the left, that like maybe like any kind of interventionist war, or whether kind of sanction is wrong. I mean, what is like, maybe US should not be running as a world policeman going around managing other people's affairs. Like we talk about democracy, people over there outside the US borders, they didn't elect us. They didn't elect our officials to run their affairs. What do our bureaucrats and our officials knows about affairs of of the other peoples across the borders? Exactly. Very little.
Very little.
This is it's I mean, everything right now, it's kind of ridiculous. This, to me, I don't even think the US government is going for like a hot war against China, because that's just too crazy, because China has nuclear weapons. So I think what they're doing right now is more like a Cold War situation where with increasing they will keep increasing tension so they can keep justifying $1 trillion defense budgets, right? Like more warships. The U.S. Navy wanted to have a 355 warship Navy.
Right.
It's just so, I mean, God, it's like they're literally doing this for their own grift. I mean, like, for us, unless you work in the military industrial complex, for those of us who are outside of it, it should be just so obvious this is a big grift, and we should not be taken by it.
I absolutely agree. Oh no, I lost my train of thought. I wanted
yeah, so let me say something more to pick up what you said about sanction hurts people of Xinjiang. That people say they care about the Uyghurs, life of Uyghur people, but all this right now, all these sanctions specifically on all these media campaigns to exclude any kind of business from operating within Xinjiang, or any kind of business that would employ Uyghur for thinking anything that employ Uyghur will be accused, labeled as employing slave labor. So now this effect of these sanction, of these campaigns against Xinjiang cottons or whatever Xinjiang product, is to make sure any Uyghur would not find employment in China.
Yeah. I remembered what it was I wanted to bring up. That might be a topic better suited for another episode. But I wanted to talk a bit about Myanmar. Do you think any of this is what's happening in Myanmar is related?
So Myanmar, I'm just right now there's an AstroTurf campaign on Twitter that's trying to tie the Myanmar coup to China. There's like the Twitter actually just created this icon for milk tea alliance that's supposedly tied Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, and Myanmar together. So this is just very odd to me. First of all, the Thailand part is because earlier there was a Thai protest against the Thai government over there, against the Thailand monarchy and the Thai military.
Right.
And the people using the Milk Tea Alliance hashtag is trying to turn that into like anti-CCP, anti-China, which is really odd because United States military is one of the biggest sponsors and backers of Thai military. like somehow that just conveniently get ignored. And also in terms of Myanmar, Myanmar has its own domestic issues. In fact, like I just don't see how China gets blamed for the Myanmar coup when China actually I actually just did a Myanmar episode with one of my buddies who teaches English in on the China-Myanmar border. He's an Australian guy who had been living in China on and off for nearly 10 years. And so he has a lot of contact for people just crossing the border. And what he said was China was doing way more business with Myanmar under Aung San Suu Kyi because, after the Western sanction got lifted on Myanmar, China did more business because, after all, U.S. is still kind of the linchpin of the world financial system, right? And China had to, after this economic sanction lifted on Myanmar after Aung San Suu Kyi got elected to power, China did way more business in Myanmar. Like China has no reason to remove Aung San Suu Kyi from power. It's kind of, it's almost like they make it sound like somehow Myanmar military junta is doing this coup on behalf of China. It's like maybe Myanmar military junta have always been nasty people that hungry for power, and they saw opportunity to remove Aung San Suu Kyi because Aung San Suu Kyi didn't do herself any favor by, just basically taking the position on the Rohingya crisis by basically denying this is the hardship that was inflicted on Rohingya by the Myanmar government, including the Myanmar military, and then Aung San Suu Kyi's for a long time Aung San Suu Kyi, his biggest backer is the West. Her husband was British. She was educated, in UK and in Britain, and her children are British citizens, and she was, for the longest time when she was in opposition, she was supported by the West. Then in the early 2000s, because U.S. was worried that because of sanctions, Myanmar was moving kind of under influence of China because China's economy was growing and they felt China's influence in Myanmar was too great. So that's when they did a reapproachment with the Myanmar military junta, offering them lifting the sanction in return for basically allowing Aung San Suu Kyi to take some part of the power, Aung San Suu Kyi's coalition party. And that's what happened in last few years. And people like very simple narratives, like, this is because China must have supported Myanmar military junta because China is pro-authoritarianism. China hates democracy. China could care less what kind of form government Myanmar takes, as long as Myanmar is stable. China prefers stability on its border over price of stability over across its border over anything. The coup in Myanmar is the last thing China wants to see, because now with increase the new Western sanction, and also the new disturbances in China, the business have sharply dropping off, and now Chinese businesses became target in Myanmar. Because again, the whole of Southeast Asia has like a lot of the Chinese the minorities in Southeast Asia has always functioning as kind of the scapegoat. The king of Thailand in early 20th century famously said, Chinese is the Jews of Southeast Asia, and he didn't mean it as a compliment. He was using kind of the the old trope, racist trope of against the Jewish people, and he applied to the Chinese.
Like as
And
bats or like as locusts, right? Or as vermin
yeah,
that need to be
yes,
squashed or something. Yeah.
like the parasite, kind of the Chinese merchants are kind of the parasite
The
that's
yellow
sucking
the
the
yellow
blood of
peril
its own.
collection.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And then like so like a lot of the people, that's why I just shake my head, because people can even talk like somehow China is backing Myanmar coup. Is again, it's playing on people's ignorance who don't know the history between China and Myanmar, and the dynamic between the two neighbor countries. You know, and also this is kind of the, again, you know, it's almost as if Myanmar military junta don't have their own volition of taking power. You know,
Right.
maybe they're just always bad people. They just always just waiting for opportunity to take power. Yeah. So that's my kind of rant.
No, thank you so much for adding that on. We've been chatting for a while, and I've loved every minute of it. I'm sure that you and I could talk plenty of hours more, and I hope that in the future we can. I think my co-host would have dozens of questions for you. So hopefully next time Eric can join us and we can chat with you. And I also have I'm close friends with someone someone from Burma, or someone who identifies as Burmese, from Myanmar.
Yeah.
And I would love to get both of you in a Zoom call, because I think you would have a really interesting.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah,
Um,
that would be great.
yeah, I would really really love that. So I hope we can pick up on this later. Please tell people where they can find your work, how they can support you, your Twitter,
Oh,
handle,
yes.
your Patreon. Go ahead and plug all of that really quickly before we sign off.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Carl Za. That's my handle on Twitter. Carl spelled with a C, and then my last name ZHA. That's Zebra Henry Apple. I run a podcast, Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions, history, culture, and politics. You can find me on Patreon. Just search for my name in Patreon, or go to patreon.com and search for Silk. Just the first result should be my podcast, Silk and Steel podcast. I would very much like it if you subscribe, because that's my main income source right now to support me for living in Bali. So thank you.